Ladies, gentlemen, and scholars of all ages, it's time to get smart in the brain so we can do item things goodly, and boy do I need it. One of the main features of the Forsaken Hollows DLC is the new Night Fares. We've already covered the Undertaker in a separate video up on this channel, but now it's time to go fully in depth with the Scholar. What do his abilities actually do in-game, how to use them the best, how to play him in a more sort of general sense, what to do and what to look for during raids for more consistent success while playing him, and then of course things like his Relic effects and the specific character relic effects that unlock from his Remembrance and other sources as well, and we will then of course walk through how to complete his Remembrances and what the relics are from that too. First up then, let's talk about his actual kit. Scholar's passive is called Bagcraft, and this has a lot of stuff going on with it. The general basics are that item stack quantity is increased, it's pretty much doubled for everything, meaning you can carry 4 fire pots instead of 2 in a single slot as one example. So you're just incentivized to carry many items by that alone. But the other part of the passive is the really important part, which is when you use an item, that type of item gains experience. For most items, this happens whenever you use it. However, for items that would apply damage, they must actually hit an enemy for it to count for level up progress. The items level up at specific thresholds, and the amount of uses you have to do depends on each specific item, but as you level them up, it makes those item types more effective on subsequent use. The maximum level for an item is level 3, and the general rule of thumb is that the level 2 version of an item is the exact same effect as the normal one, but more potent, whether that be more damage or a larger buff, depending on the specific item we're talking about. The level 3 versions add bonus effects entirely. I won't go through all of the level 2 effects because they're again very straightforward, like Starlight Shards just become more FP at level 2 than they are at level 1, but we will go through the level 3 bonuses, as those are much more substantial, like again Starlight Shards, which now increases maximum FP as well if you use it at level 3. That said, we'll go through one item type at a time, with a reminder that using any items within that type will contribute to leveling all others of the same type too. Starting with stones at level 3 then, Starlight Shards increase maximum FP. Glintstone Scraps are faster and more powerful. Large Glintstone Scrap, again faster and more powerful. Cuckoo Glintstone creates a giant AoE explosion upon landing. Gravity Stone Fan leaves a damaging pool of repeating gravity damage on the floor where it lands. Gravity Stone Chunks have a pulling in effect to bring in nearby enemies now as well. And then Warming Stones just have a larger area of effect and heal you up faster while you're inside of it. Next item type is Boluses, and these are relatively easy because they're all exactly the same, which is that they decrease the buildup rate of their related status ailment. And to be clear, Boluses by default will increase resistance to an ailment, which is essentially a larger bar that has to be filled before the status will apply. But the level 3 effect also makes incoming ailment buildup reduced too, so it's like the flip side of the same coin of status resistance. Next item type I'm going to call Animal Parts for lack of a better option. Silver and gold pickled fowl feet apply each other's effect, so a level 3 silver foot also applies gold foot effect and vice versa. Fun bonus note that will come up again later, but the relic effect that makes item usage apply to allies also applies to your leveled up Bagcraft items, so you can use one foul foot to apply both buffs to yourself and any nearby allies too, which is pretty awesome. Boiled prawns and boiled crab both give you increased maximum HP on top of the base physical damage negation that it gives you by default, which makes them much better. Another item great for applying to allies, and then the pickled turtleneck item also increases maximum stamina on top of just stamina regen too. Exalted Flesh, the last of this item type, gives you affinity damage boost on top of the physical damage boost that it gives normally, which makes this even more valuable too. For the Wondrous Flask of Physic tiers, these all have the same effect for level 3, which is a general increase to your maximum health, maximum FP, and maximum stamina for a full 2 minutes, which is quite a solid buff duration, and to be more specific, it seems to be a buff to the vigor, endurance, and mind stats, not the actual bars themselves. Then we have Throwing Pots, and these are one of the generally sought after most best uses of this skill. I'll blast through this one relatively quick because there are a lot of pots. Fire pots leave a damaging pool of fire on the floor after exploding. Magic pots additionally spawn glintstone pebbles after exploding as a bonus. Lightning pots just straight up strike a second time after a short delay. Holy pots can now heal you if you are hit by them while injured. Poison pots and fetid pots are a bit of an odd one to work out, so I'm not really sure on this. They definitely build up faster and seem to have a larger AoE, but these also apply some sort of debuff to enemies. That debuff icon is usually used to mean some sort of reduced defensive, but attack damage isn't increased, so it's not physical negation. I tried with affinity as well, so it's not increased damage. It doesn't seem to reduce their damage done to other things. My best guess would be that it makes them have reduced status resistance, but that's a stab in the dark really. I don't really know, so if one of you watching this has worked it out properly, please tell us in the comments down below. Swarm pots increase in size and also leave behind the little natural bleed buildup applying pools on the ground. Freezing Pots leave behind a damaging zone of ice on the ground and applies frostbite consistently in that area with the bonus hits. Sleep Pots are bigger and restore FP if you are standing in their area, and you can even walk into the area after the explosion and still get the FP restored. Volcano Pots gain a magma pool on the ground to add on to their existing damage over time function, and then Rancor Pots just spawn more wraiths and do more damage essentially as a result. The Alluring and Beast Lure Pots leave clouds of AoE behind that deal a bit of damage over time, which isn't too bad of a bonus effect for those. Then we've got Throwing Knives, and these are both simple and a bit complex at the same time. All the Throwing Knives, the Poison Bone Darts, the Kukri, all of these here do the exact same thing, which is reduce enemy damage negation. Specifically, it seems to be about 2% general damage negation reduction per throwing knife that hits, and it stacks. So 10 knives is 20% reduced damage negation, and 20% seems to be the cap of this debuff. But that means that knives can be a massive damage increase if you get them to level 3, and of course if you have enough of them on you to make this debuff active and keep it active at a high stack. After that, let's talk about perfumes and the Bewitching Branches. And before we get into the perfumes, I have no idea what Bewitching Branches do at level 3, I'm just gonna say it. No way to work it out in the sparring grounds, and I've just not had the stars line up for this to be a thing I can even try in an active run yet. As for the rest of them, Spark Aromatic, the only difference I could tell is that the damage is significantly higher, maybe a higher AoE on the blast as well. Poison Spray Mist has an extra explosion after you use it. Iron Jar gets an explosion when the buff falls off of you, and the exact same thing is true of the Uplifting Aromatic and the Blood Boil Aromatic as well. Then finally, the Acid Spray Mist also just gets an extra explosion during its uptime, so basically the vast majority of the perfumes just boil down to, hey, here's an explosion. Weapon and shield greases become more potent and have an extended duration, up to a full minute compared to the base 30-second duration of greases and Nightreign in general, which makes greases one of the good items to hoard on Scholar, as you can get full benefit from only using one on rare occasion. Then finally we've got tools, which are a fun one as they are the only item that isn't consumable, meaning that you can use them infinitely. However, the only one that you can start a expedition with is the Wraith Calling Bell through a relic effect, but they all essentially work the same as far as the leveling system goes, which is to say that they just increase their damage done a fairly large amount for each extra level they have. And honestly, that is enough to make these totally worth using as Scholar. And that does it for the passive ability. Yes, I know I've been talking for quite a long time already, and that's just the first part of his kit, but it is also by far the most complex part of him as a character, so we should be able to just breeze through the rest of this now. Scholar's character skill is called Analyse. When activated, you enter a new stance. You don't have to hold the button down, which is worth mentioning. I know a lot of people are doing this and being confused about it, but while in this stance, a circular gauge will start to fill up on any enemy that is in the circular view circle. The speed of the gauge filling depends on a number of factors. The biggest one is range. The closer you are to the enemy, the faster it will fill up. Other factors are number of enemies, which seems to change the speed, and having an ally in the view circle also speeds it up pretty dramatically too, seemingly to make up for if you're doing it from a bit further away because it's attacking someone else. The game states that the speed is also affected by seeing specific actions, implying that analyzing certain attacks would make it quicker, but I haven't noticed that yet personally at least. You can end the skill at any point with either a debuff to all targeted enemies or a buff that only applies to the Scholar himself. A lot of people, including myself, misunderstood this one from pre-release footage and from early gameplay right after release, but from what I can tell, there is no situation in which this specific buff will apply to allies in your group, only the Scholar itself. There is a relic effect that can apply a different buff, and we'll talk about that later, but the raw Analyze skill itself does not seem to buff allies even when you use the self-buff version. That said, the buff or debuff, depending on which you choose, scales with the gauge fill level, which is judged by the enemy itself. If the gauge is at 50% or less, it is a level 1 buff or debuff. If the gauge is half or above, but not full, it is a level 2 buff or debuff. When the gauge is full, it is a level 3 buff or debuff. If you choose debuff, then it will apply to any enemy that has that circle on them, with the stage of debuff they get corresponding to the enemy's individual circle filling. Level 1 debuff reduces the damage that the enemy does. Level 2 is a stronger version of that same effect, so it significantly reduces the damage they do. Then level 3 makes that enemy take 60% bonus damage from the next hit that they receive, so you can combo that with something like an ally's ultimate art for massive damage potential with a little bit of coordination. The flip side of this is that you can instead use the skill to buff yourself using a different input. The level of buff depends on the most filled enemy Analyze gauge in the circle, so if you have a bunch of various enemies in the Analyze but there is at least one with the full gauge, you get the full level 3 buff. Level 1 self buff is maximum stamina and stamina regeneration increase. Level 2 self buff is more of that exact same thing, and then level 3 buff buff is a bit of a funky one. It gives you a very momentary shield, like less than a second, and during that moment, if you get hit by the enemy, you essentially parry them for a pile of damage and stagger. They will always either flinch or in many cases fully stagger, letting you get a free crit. So this is very high risk with the timing, but very solid reward when you pull it off. As well, it's worth mentioning there is a specific setting in the controls menu for camera speed during Analyse if you want to make it higher than your normal sensitivity is too. Then for Scholar's ultimate art, this is actually the simplest part of him as a character. When you use this, you connect all nearby allies and all nearby enemies. When a threaded enemy takes damage, other threaded enemies also take 20% of that damage, nice and simple. When a threaded ally receives healing, it applies to all threaded allies. The extra part of this worth knowing is that if you use this ultimate art and an ally goes down while it's active, you can revive your ally by hitting the threaded enemies because it also will contribute to the revive bar of the ally, which is a very nice extra feature of the ultimate. Past that, here are his stats. His best offensive stat scaler is Arcane, which means that he can apply statuses better than most other Nightfarers, but not a ridiculous amount compared to how weak his melee and spell scaling stats are in comparison. That said, if on a run you happen to come across a Ripple Blade Axe or the Ripple Crescent Halberd, these are both weapons that have S arcane scaling on them, which would work very well for this character. There are some other arcane scaling weapons like the Bell-Bearing Hunter related weaponry, but those are only B scaling, and then it just sort of gets worse from there really. Scholar's starting weapon isn't even an arcane scaling weapon, it's S dexterity and E arcane, which is pretty awful honestly, so he really just cannot rely on raw weapon damage unless you find a proper arcane scaling weapon, or with one of the relics we'll talk about later. Other than that, you pretty much just need to rely on either items or consumables for damage, or of course on statuses. Pretty much everything else he just feels weaker than the other Nightfarers. That said, items can be a lot of fun, but there is a lot of RNG in what you can find during a run, how many items that you find during a run, how frequently you're able to actually use them in genuinely helpful ways. Obviously, you could plan specific pit stops into your route, like Mage Towers will always have glintstone related items in them for you to stock up on. Bleed Runes will always have bleed related items, and you can find things like bleed greases. The Field of Gravity miners north of the castle on the standard map will always give you a big pile of gravity stone chunks and fans, the type of stuff that is all targetable during your run in this way to get items. But even then, it's not like you can say, I want to exclusively use throwing knives, so I'm going to go get myself some throwing knives. The main exception to this though is that all merchants will sell an infinite amount of fire pots, so if you are willing to go full in on fire pots specifically, you can get a steady source of them. But even then, for a big boss fight, you are likely to run out of pots before the fight ends, which is why generally speaking, I think what you need for a full item focused scholar is one of the unlimited use tools. There is a relic effect that lets you start any run with Wraith Calling Bell, which has great range, decent tracking, and decent damage even at level 1, but Scholar can get it up to level 3 and increase the damage that it does dramatically. It takes a lot of uses to level up because it's a very spammy item and they balance it as such, but once it is leveled, it will do a lot of good for you. And if you find something like the Ancestral Infant's Head or either of the Omen Barn tool items, those are all affected by the same level up, so you can use them effectively as well. And it's worth mentioning that this is one of the items that you do need to hit enemies with to get level up XP towards the item. You can't just spam it out in an open field. The other option, or I suppose the thing that you should mix with this, as there's no reason not to use both together, is statuses. With S arcane scaling, we have great status buildup, so bleed is fantastic against anything bleedable, frostbite is super consistent, and you can always pair that with a source of fire damage for the sort of pseudo bleed nature of that combo. Rot and poison are great too, of course, especially as for those ones you can apply the status to the boss, then switch to item usage while the statuses are ticking away naturally. Basically, at least until you have some specific relics we'll get into in a second, you really want to just lean into a combination of items and statuses, or especially status applying items as well, or else you just won't have a whole lot of offense to contribute if you just try and use standard weapon attacks on Scholar. A couple of examples of a sort of starting setup that I used with Scholar before getting his character specific relics is Wraith Calling Bell at start, Starlight Shards at start for increased spamability on the bell to level it up super quickly, and this also lets you get your level ups on magic stones as an item type, which is great for warming stones later in the run and stuff like that. Then starting armament inflicts blood loss or some sort of an Ash of War that applies status application to just some sort of access to bleed, or honestly any status is good regardless. Another option if you want to purely focus on the bell itself and a bit of ally support, Wraith Calling Bell at start, then focus on magic attack power boost as it's one of the only things that the bell scales with, and then really important to note here that the items confer effect to all nearby allies. Relic effect does apply to the upgraded level 3 version of items when you use them as Scholar. As you can see by this Foul Foot, applying both Foul Foot buffs to my ally right here. That said, one other thing to mention is that passives on weapons that make things happen while you're walking, or dormant powers that do the same thing, are really good for Scholar. While you are in your stance of analyzing, you are walking. When you're using items, most of the time you'll be walking, especially with Wraith Calling Bell, you'll be consistently walking, so you can get something like a weapon that has Wraiths fire while walking, and a dormant power that is Flames of Frenzy fire out while walking, then you can just sort of start exploding for all this extra bonus damage while you're doing things you would already be doing with that character. That said, that covered, let's get into Scholar's Relic effects and what they actually do. Prevent slowing of character skill progress removes the decay of gauge buildup during Analyse. Normally, if you were to Analyze, then stop using the skill, then start it up again, the bar on your enemies would decrease over time. With this Relic effect, it does not decrease, letting you Analyze in short bursts instead of doing the whole thing in one go. Allies targeted by character skill gain boosted attack. This is a very interesting one. It seems to be around a 20% bonus general damage to any ally that is affected. This will apply to any ally in your targeting reticle when the Analyze is fully activated. It does not apply to yourself, but this happens whether or not the ability itself is charged to level 1, level 2, level 3, doesn't matter. It will always apply when you launch off the skill, and regardless of whether you choose enemy debuff or self buff, regardless of what choice you make, if an ally is in the reticle when you enact the skill use, the allies will get that buff. Earn runes for each additional specimen acquired with character skill. You get runes when the circle fills up on targets in the circle, nice and simple. It won't help out your raw offense, but the extra runes will let you buy more items from merchants and such along the way, which does in a roundabout way affect your actual damaging ability. So there is definitely potential use for this one. Continuous damage inflicted on targets threaded by ultimate art is great for any situation with lots of equally important enemies. Say a fight like the new Balancer's Expedition Night 3 boss, that would be fantastic with this effect. But in most encounters, this would either be excessive for lots of little guys, or would just be not that great of a use of a relic slot if it's just like a singular big boss type enemy that wouldn't help. Then we have two effects that are specific to relics that unlock after you defeat the Dreglord expedition for the first time. You have to purchase these from the collector's signboard at that point, and they are stat flipping relics. Improved Mind, Reduced Vigor. This one is mostly just to lean into the long range tool spamming playstyle for Scholar. Wraith Calling Bell would be great for this, for example. It would benefit a lot from the increased FP, from the extra mind, and the distance that you can use it at makes the HP penalty a little bit less painful. But I'd argue that his mind by default is good enough that this just feels like unnecessary, honestly. On the flip side, his other one of these is improved endurance and dexterity at the cost of reduced intelligence and arcane. The reduced intelligence is basically a non-factor. Reduced arcane means we won't have the same status buildup ability, but it's absolutely worth that to get dexterity as an actual stat on the character so that you have something to scale weapons with. And endurance just as a cherry on top too, which will scale great with your self buff from Analyse. Then the final one is reduced FP consumption when using character skill on self. This simply adds an extra buff to the self buff part of Analyse that makes you use less FP while it's active. As for which of these are worth using generally, I would say that prevent slowing of character skill progress is a lot better in solos than it is in groups. It's not that big of a deal for groups. Allies targeted by character skill gain boosted attack is fantastic for group play, but obviously worthless in solos. Improved endurance and dexterity at the cost of intelligence and arcane, I think is going to be a staple relic used on this character for a very long time once you unlock it, because it just changes his avenues of damage dealing and makes him a lot more capable of using regular weapons. All of the other effects I think are just very niche to specific playstyles, build concepts, or specific expedition targets. Just to mention them as well, as I think this is the best part to do so, once you beat the Dreglord for the first time on any character, you unlock some new relics for purchase at the signboard, including 2 for Scholar specifically, which are the ones with the stat flip effects, and then some secondary stat bonuses on them too. That said, let's talk about his vessels really quick. The Scholar's default vessel is red, red, yellow on both sides. Scholar's Goblet is purchasable from the Small Jar Bazaar. I didn't see it until after completing the Dreglord expedition, but it's possible that it unlocked before that point, and this one is blue, green, yellow on both sides. Scholar's Chalice is unlocked for completing the Chapter 3 Remembrance objective for this character, and this is his red, blue, white vessel with red, yellow, yellow depth relic slots. The others here are all purchased from the collector's signboard for Everdark Sigils. Soot Covered is blue, green, green on both sides. Sealed Urn is yellow, red, red, green, blue, blue. Decrepit Goblet is blue, blue, green on both sides, and then Forgotten Goblet is yellow, green, blue with red, green, white on the depth relic side. That said, let's talk about the Remembrance now, how to progress it, and the rewards that you receive. First step is just play as Scholar. Win or lose, you'll get the first couple of steps here filled out. I got to chapter 3 before I even won an expedition with him, and that's the first proper Remembrance interaction you have to go to. Initiate it by going to the journal, and then following the objectives in the round table hold. You'll be asked to talk to some different people, and then you'll be told that you need to visit the underground section of the marsh location during a new expedition. To do this, you need to be in one of the new 2 expedition targets to have that location type show up. They otherwise just don't exist in the game, and it's this symbol here on your map, which most people are calling swamp specifically. When you load in, you will get a marker on the specific swamp that you need to go to, and once there, when you are descending within, look off to the side for a path like this that goes back upwards. This will lead you off to the right of the normal path, and it will bring you to the Remembrance objective in this little nook. Pick it up, and you're good to go. No matter how the expedition goes from that point, you've completed your Remembrance. It'll continue when you go back to the hub, and the reward for this chapter is the Scholar's Chalice vessel that we talked about previously. Then after that, you need to win an expedition in order to unlock chapter 5, which is a proper full-like mini mission for the Scholar here. Pick it up, go talk to the small jar NPC. He will bring you into the Great Hollow in a specific sort of cathedral area on the ground floor. Go up the stairs of this building to the top floor, then from there you can jump up top to the central hanging rock structure in the middle and use it to go all the way up to the ramparts above. On this side of the room here, there is a hole in the wall up to a secret room. First time that you walk in here, it will tell you that it's locked, and then it will spawn a Godskin Apostle and some knights as a boss fight downstairs. So when that happens, leave the room, go across the beams, and right below you is this fight. Win the fight, go back up to that hidden room, and now it will be unlocked. Interact with the journal on the table, then interact with the crystal on the corner, and the Remembrance will be completed. The end reward for this step is the Cleansing Tear Relic, which is a red relic with the continuous damage inflicted on targets threatened by ultimate art effect, as well as general improved affinity damage negation, which is nice, and defeating enemies fills more of the art gauge, which of course does work quite well with his ultimate art, because you can cast it in a big group of enemies, then use it to kill the group faster, and every kill will then contribute to the ultimate gauge recharging. This is definitely not a bad relic overall by any means, and if you don't have any better options and you can fit it in, I do think it is a solid choice, but I also think that Scholar is the most hungry for specific relic effects of a character, like the ones that give you items at start of expedition, or give you status on starting weapons too, not to mention the actual like meta relic effects that every Nightfarer wants to use even outside of that. Once you've done that, then you need to win another 1 or 2 expeditions to progress the journal further until you reach chapter 8. Then you also need to have defeated the Balancer's expedition as well, and the reason for that is chapter 8's objective is to defeat the Dreglord, who is second of the 2 new expeditions, and you need to do it while playing Scholar of course as well. This is a pretty big ask, very much not an easy encounter in general, not to spoil it for people who haven't seen it yet, but it's generally quite a long fight, which just inherently makes it tough for a character that relies heavily on item usage, which is limited. That said, finish this final Remembrance, and you will get his second unique relic after a conversation with the Undertaker when you return to the Round Table Hold, which is Note, My Dear Successor. This is a yellow color relic that is fantastic for group play, like a must slot in essentially. Allies targeted by character skill gain boosted attack. We went over how good that is, and then prevent slowing of character skill progress, which just makes Analyse easier to use, but it's not the reason I think this relic is great. It's the first effect, and the third effect on it, which is character skill cooldown reduction +3. So you can use this to just super frequently apply 20% damage bonuses to your allies. The other reward for finishing the final Remembrance chapter then is of course the Remembrance specific skin for Scholar, and here's what it looks like in game. It gives you the Albinaric circlet to sort of, I guess, clarify that he is actually an Albinaric. Surprise if you weren't paying attention to his story along the way. And while we're here, might as well show you the rest of his skins too. The Dawn and Darkness skins are unlocked after defeating the Balancer's expedition with any Nightfarer, it doesn't have to be Scholar, and then the other 2 are unlocked after your first Dreglord expedition win, which again, does not have to be specifically on Scholar. That just about does it for today then everyone. A full breakdown of the Scholar, one of the 2 new Nightfarers in Nightreign's DLC. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and I wish you the best of luck analyzing all of your opponents, and your friends too. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.